Welcome to Modern Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping you feel better about your finances. I'm your host, Jim Grace, and I'll be your guide as we discuss the psychology of money and explore the emotional aspects that shape our financial decisions and how we feel about them. A quick note before we start, although I do hope that you find the information on this show to be helpful, in no way are any of these discussions to be taken as specific financial advice. Please do your own research and talk to your own advisors, especially when making important financial decisions. Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, thank you so much for joining me on Modern Financial Wellness. How are you?
I am very good, Jim. I'm excited to have this conversation with you today.
Likewise. So the name of your website is breakingmoneysilence.com. You're an author, a wealth psychology expert, financial coach, been in the industry a long time. So we're grateful for your time and expertise today, and specifically around this idea of breaking money silence. And this is kind of a theme that comes up on the podcast regularly from a lot of different angles. It's tough to talk about money. It can be stressful and anxiety inducing for a lot of different reasons for many people. So I think it'll be important for us to spend some time there. But before we do, I'd love to just have you share a little bit about your background and work throughout the industry over the years, because I'm very interested in your role and kind of trailblazing this human-focused, psychology-focused financial advising that you've done over the years. So would you mind opening up and just telling us a little bit about your background?
I am an open book. That is not a problem at all.
Awesome.
And I think so I came into the industry and started to do the work around the human side of finance in 2008. So I think part of what helped me is I had an outsider viewpoint. I have never been a financial advisor. I'm not a certified financial planner. I spend a lot of time training and coaching individuals like you and individuals like that. However, my background is a mix between banking and finance and psychology. So by the time I got to the industry, I was very experienced in financial education and in all the tactics it would take to help somebody empower themselves. And I applied it to money and started my company, KBK Wealth Connection. So I didn't plan on being a trailblazer. I kind of was very naive and innocent and said, gee, I want to do more to empower women. And so maybe I'll empower financial advisors who at the time were predominantly men to do a better job serving women. And I'm happy to report, that has worked out very well over the last 15 or so years.
That's great. Yeah. And what was the response early on when you came to the market with whatever form your company was to kind of service financial advisors and help their clients feel more empowered about their financial situation? What was the response early on? Because it feels to me like this shift towards the psychology and the therapeutic and the other areas of finance and what financial well-being is a relatively new topic, at least from an overall industry perspective. What was the response that you received?
So that's a great and interesting question. I think in 2008, we all know what was going on. Advisors were dealing with angry clients. And they, were talking about feelings, but it was more like triaging, like, this is really incredibly hard for me. And so when I started by helping advisors manage their feelings and also respond to their clients' feelings. And so when I first set out to do this work, I definitely still have this passion. I focused in on women and wealth and how to give financial advice to affluent women. And what was interesting as I started to speak on the topic, as I started to write on the topic and publish my first book in this industry on that, a lot of times, even though the intro of my book, which I later found out people don't read intros except for other authors, my intro of my book basically says, this is a book about women for the male advisor. And people would see the title, they'd see that I was a female, and they'd say, oh, we're going to have you speak at the women's conference. And so very much early on, I don't think the psychology piece was as strong. It was more like, oh, this is an opportunity. We need to capitalize on this opportunity. We're messing up, because the Boston Consulting Group around the same time came out with a really eye-opening report about how the industry wasn't serving women very well. And so it took me a long time to get people to understand that this was a message not just for women, but also, even more importantly, for the men who potentially were missing the mark. I mean, since then, I just gave a talk on this topic to a group of female advisors. So it's not gender specific, but that was kind of the interesting thing. I think the other thing is it took me a long time at the beginning to figure out, how do I incorporate the psychology piece in, even to the point where I wouldn't use the word feelings, because it felt so off-putting. And someone who's hired, and I've worked with her for years now on events, she said, the first time you spoke, you talked a little bit. I always build something in about the psychology of finance, even at the beginning. She goes, there were two gentlemen in the back of the room, and you started talking about financial therapy and mindsets, and they kind of sat back in their chair. She goes, and then she goes, as time went forward and I keep hiring you, I'm watching people now leaning forward. So there's definitely been a shift, and it's certainly not just me, it's other people in this space. But when I started, it was pretty grassroots. And now I would say it's mainstream, and certainly the psychology of money, financial therapy, behavioral finance is definitely a key differentiator, and something that is no longer nice to have. It's necessary to have. And you can really see the difference since coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, that's really interesting throughout your description. One of the things that I keyed on, and I had a similar experience when I got into the industry as a financial advisor, it was around 2008, 2009. So we coincidentally stepped in at the same beautiful moment in the middle of a global financial crisis. But as I think about behavioral finance, just to kind of use a big, broad, aspect of what we're talking about, it only really came up if it was identified as an opportunity. And I think it kind of described it similarly, where it wasn't like we should really understand our clients in front of us as whole people and really help them navigate their entire lives and how they relate to money. It was just, can we identify something that's getting in the way of getting us to a sale? Right? It was part of the process. And it feels to me, I'm curious your thoughts. It sounds like you might agree that the industry is really coming around where it's mainstream to not only find opportunities, but to be really adding value and trying to help our clients feel better about their financial situation.
I think so. My one caveat is I feel like there's pockets of the industry that still are what I would call more traditional financial advising. It's about investments. It's about, for some of them, it's about selling. And that's fine if that works for them and that's what they want to do. I do think that because women have so much economic power and the next generation has a different view of how they want to work with financial advisors, that I think those two pieces together has pushed the industry, that and you throw in a bunch of technology, has pushed the industry towards, boy, we better be more client-centric because this is our competitive edge. And so there's a business reason, there always has been, but it's a clearer business reason. And I also think that it took a while for the research to be done, for people who were well known in the field to adapt this model. And the bottom line is it's something like 85% of Americans trust financial advisors that demonstrate emotional intelligence. And if you trust somebody, you're more likely to give a referral. It just makes good business sense.
Right.
The flip side, which is what I work with people on because I don't manage their money, is it also makes for happier people who are more financially literate and confident. And I think that's a good thing for our society now and going forward. So it's kind of this combination of things came together and pushed us in this direction. And it's been a long wait.
Yeah. Well, it makes total sense though, right? You have thought leaders, yourself amongst them coming to the industry and probably talking to these things and say, hey, look, people think this is important, but it takes time to do studies and come up with that statistic of 85% of people trust a financial advisor who shows emotional intelligence. Is that, did I get that right?
Yep. And one way to show it, is to talk to them about their relationship with money and communicate effectively. And so there's a lot of ways to show it, but clients want to be cared for. And yes, they want you to help them make money, manage money, save money, invest money, whatever it might be. But if you don't really care about them and it's just about a sale, I just don't think that works anymore. It hasn't worked for a while.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I guess that segues into opening up a conversation about money, right? And talking about money and helping people with that. It's kind of a common theme across the board, regardless of who I'm talking to and when. It's a difficult conversation. Talking about money and personal finances as a couple is challenging. As a woman, I'm sure is even more difficult in certain circumstances. In your background and expertise, where does that come from? What's the problem here when talking about money?
That's the $1 million question. I do think, it's a big question. I do think that when we look in the past and we look at how many of us were raised by parents that were taught that money is just a rational thing, that emotions don't belong in it. And we were taught by parents or significant caregivers that lived in a very money taboo society and money talk taboo society. So they didn't have a roadmap to pass on to us to say, here's how you talk about money in your relationship. Some would, some wouldn't. And so we just grew up, many of us, just witnessing things and making our own assumptions. And then you look at the messages in the media and the messages in movies. And so, this taboo against talking about money goes back centuries. And it's only recently that we've decided, well, this isn't very healthy. In fact, when you look at millennials, they actually in one survey said that they believe our society would be healthier if we talked about personal finance more. And that was as high as like 71% of millennials. So there's a generational phenomenon happening. So I think for couples, it's often they don't have a roadmap on how to do it. And unless you're forced to do it, or there's a crisis, you don't do it. I think for women, it's a little bit different. I think and not to say that men don't have a difficult time or people who identify as non-binary, doesn't mean that other people don't have a hard time. It's with women, there's this double-edged sword, right? So we're told, we should be more financially fit than our parents. Or the last generation, we should ask and get paid what we're worth. We should close the gender wage gap. But when we start talking about money, when we start asking for money, there are different judgments that are made. So it's a double-edged sword. Like, she's being awfully aggressive, as opposed to maybe she's negotiating her salary because she's assertive, like the gentleman next to her. So I do think there's a lot of mixed messages. There was research that came out the other day that female breadwinners have less happy marriages. I'm not sure that's true. I've been a female breadwinner, have a great marriage. So I think there's a lot that's out there that sends this really weird message to many women. The good news, Jim, is that the younger generations don't seem to really care as much as maybe older millennials and Gen Xers like me.
Yeah. It's interesting. I could definitely see the biases or the perspectives that we inherit from our parents. I'm a victim of that as well. I still get a little uncomfortable at dinner conversations when the topic comes up. And a lot of that I got from my parents. It just was not polite to talk about money. I less well understand the perspective of a female breadwinner as an example. So I'm really curious, what do you think is happening there? And you seemed a little surprised by the statistic that female breadwinners tend to have. What was the description?
I'm not sure I'm using their words exactly, but like less happy marriages. Like you often will see this, and I didn't have a chance yet to drill down into the research and see how many, people were in the survey. But I have heard this before. And I think what ends up happening is no matter who is the primary breadwinner, or if you're a team, which is the majority of people, a team kind of earning money together, that it is about how that individual couple feels about managing money. In my marriage, we've had what's called a seesaw marriage, where it's like sometimes I'm the female breadwinner, sometimes he's earning more, and it really depends on life circumstances. Right. And I think if both partners are comfortable with that, in fact, I have a husband that likes when I'm a female breadwinner. I know other women that have the same thing. Not to say like he's lazy and not doing anything, but he's not threatened by that. And so I think that if you look at the shifting gender roles, that some men have been raised that that's their job and feel kind of threatened by that. In other couples, it's not the case. That's that some men really enjoy. Oh, this is great. It takes a little pressure off of me. So I think it really varies person to person. But I do think society still hasn't accepted the female breadwinner, just like they haven't accepted the stay-at-home dad. Like, it's not easy to be a stay-at-home dad. A lot of judgment there. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it, that there's these assigned gender roles. And I'm curious, as a female breadwinner, is the kind of the natural gender role that the husband or the male partner is going to make all the financial decisions, is going to be the CFO of the household? Do you find kind of the stereotypical default of not just earning the money, but making decisions with it? And all of a sudden that dynamic's a little messy.
I think that historically has been the default. I don't think, one of the things I did write a book on couples, how to give financial advice to couples. And one of the things I did is interviewed all these couples. And the beauty of writing a book is you learn so much because you have your viewpoint in the world, like how I do it in my relationship, how my parents did it, how his parents did it. And then you start interviewing people and you're like, wow, what I found is that there's no right way to do this thing called money. And you know this in the work that you do. It is more about if the couple gets together and at least talks about how they're going to do it and figures out what works for them. And then occasionally you want to revisit that conversation because life changes, whether it's kids, whether it's different jobs, going back to school, whatever it might be. But I really saw it all over the board. In fact, a good friend of mine, they do money kind of like they were college roommates. Some of them, they still have like some bills she pays for, some bills he pays for. And they have 3 kids and have been in a long-term marriage, but it works. She's like, I never thought of doing it differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's what I was trying to work through mentally, is to get to that point. Like, I've seen the same thing in my practice where regardless of who's earning more or who's making decisions or who's, paying the bills or however that works, it can work in a number of different ways and all different varieties, but it seems to work best when people are coming to the table and having decent conversations about it. Right. Right. Go ahead.
You don't have to love finance to be at the table. That's the other thing. So one of the stories I will tell you in doing this work is, as you're looking at money psychology and you're training people, you can't help but kind of, and I think you should, do your own work. And there was an instant in our marriage early on, maybe we were married like 10 years, where we got ripped off by a contractor. And it was this financial crisis that we had. And in that moment, in that crisis, we realized for the first time, because like a lot of couples, you just kind of fall into your roles, that I was managing all the money, not making all the money, but managing all the money. And he didn't even really have access to the checkbook. I'm like horrified even to admit that. But what we realized was that ever since we got engaged, I'm not kidding you, one of the first things I did after getting engaged is took Brian to the bank and we blended the accounts and then I controlled them. That isn't necessarily healthy for our relationship. And this crisis kind of brought out like, well, wait a second, we should share responsibility. So the reason I say that story is, Brian in my marriage is not the financially dominant one, but he adds a lot to the mix and it actually is really good at investing and making sure we're taking on enough risk. So it's about getting to the table and getting people's perspective. It isn't necessarily that it's your passion. I mean, I don't love balancing a checkbook. I just happen to be the one in the marriage that knew how to do it.
Right. And I've had similar experiences in my own marriage, and I've shared those on this podcast before where we didn't talk about money by default. I became a financial advisor. And when I made that transition, I was making less money. So I didn't really want to talk about it because I wasn't where I wanted to be. And my wife felt like she didn't understand it. And all of a sudden she's, now dating at the time a professional. So it made her uncomfortable all around. And now supposedly I had the expertise to just handle it. So we just defaulted ourselves into this position where we weren't talking about money until, somewhat recently where we had kids and houses and projects. And it's, well, this doesn't work, right? Not talking about it only makes it worse, because you end up in these situations where it's not a crisis per se, but it's a bigger conversation that you have to have based on what's going on. So how do we get to the table the right way, right? What's the right way in that case to set up a good conversation to start talking about money?
Well, what I encourage couples to do, and advisors that are working with couples, is you can start anywhere, but try to start talking about money. I'll explain what I mean. So an exercise that's in my book called Breaking Money Silence, there's an exercise about your money talk mindset. So how you think and feel about engaging in a variety of different financial conversations is going to impact how you feel and whether you actually follow through and do it. And in doing a quick assessment, like, what did your parents teach you about money? What's your most comfortable financial conversation? What's your most uncomfortable conversation? A variety of different questions to kind of get you to think about, what is my mindset about engaging in these financial conversations? And what I encourage couples to do, no matter where you are in a relationship, ideally, this would be something that couples would do before they got married, is start to talk about what are the lessons you learned? What is your money talk mindset? Where are you strong? Because we all have strengths. My husband is very good at negotiation and really taught me a lot about that. Whereas my strength might have been, talking to a bank and about interest rates, whatever it might be. And so it's really talking about that mindset. And what that does, Jim, is it allows you to be talking about the lessons you learned. And it's less about you do this and you spend this and you don't save that. And it's more about, where did this come from? And I find that when we know where our partners are coming from, that when we do get into the dollars and cents, when it gets heated, sometimes you can take a step back and go, where do you think that's coming from? Because I have a very different viewpoint on that. And then again, you're talking about your influences, and the beauty of couplehood, and I've been married 26 years now, the beauty of couplehood is then you get to decide, do we want to keep doing what our parents were doing or what we learned, or do we want to do something different? And I think you can learn a lot from your partner, no matter what their relationship is for money, that can balance out your money personality. It certainly has balanced out mine.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And it sounds like great pre-work to the conversation. So you don't have to dig in, and probably it's detrimental to go right to, and I've lived this, where you get to the budget, where you're trying to tell each other how to spend money. That's a recipe for disaster if you haven't spent a little time up front talking about where you come from, who you are, what gets you excited, what gets you upset, all those different things. So that's great advice. And I've seen that as helpful as we've done this work. My wife and I, we have better conversations about money. And again, otherwise it's just telling your spouse or partner, whoever it is, to stop doing something.
Yeah,
and
you're doing it wrong.
You're doing it wrong, right? Yeah, exactly. You're pointing the proverbial finger. So
I'll give you a quick story. My husband and I, when we first met, he used to order, he has this habit, no matter whether he had money or not, of just being like, drinks all around, or I'll buy everybody dinner, or, it's this grand gesture. He's a very caring, generous person. And, I would then be like, what are you doing? So this would lead to a fight, not publicly. And so that's years ago. You flash forward now, we now have had a conversation about, okay, before we go out to dinner, let's just talk about where we're at. So if he's going to pick up the tab or whatever, I kind of have some prep and we have some conversation. So the other night we're at dinner, we haven't had this conversation. We've had some wine, and my husband looks at me across a table of 8 people and holds up the credit card. Like, I'm going to pay. And I wish there was a video of this. I'm on the other side. Our friends didn't see any of this. I'm like, no.
So you're having that conversation real time.
Yeah, real time. And so we actually, in a split second, compromised. And I was like, those 2, because they had been staying at our house. So he was able to pick up the tab for 2 of the 8 people.
Got ya. Yeah.
But we did a lot of work before that. In the past, that would have been a huge fight.
And just if you don't mind sharing, where does that come from? What did you find? Is he a social guy? He likes to take care of people. Did that come from anything in particular?
I think it comes from two different places. And he, if he was here, he might have a different answer. But he came from a home, single mom, not a lot of money, like paycheck to paycheck, if they could even pay stuff. And so now that he's done financially well, he's an incredibly generous person. So I think that's part of it, is like, I can now do this for other people. He also is just a caring person who's like the first person to help you out with your bike, or if there's someone at a party that doesn't know anybody, is the first. So it's kind of just part of this extension of his personality. The dilemma is when, and this is my financial background, but when you don't have the money to pay for everybody at the table, should you really be paying for everybody at the table?
Right. Yeah. 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 in some cases, right? Yeah.
But I've gotten more generous and he's gotten more budget conscious. So it's a trade-off.
I see that in things like buying gifts for kids, right? Two different spouses in a marriage, they come from different backgrounds, and Christmas or whatever holiday or birthday means different things. And there's discrepancies in how we're going to pay for things based on where we come from, right? How did our parents pay for our college education, as an example? What should we, fund for our children now? And again, having that, pre-work to the actual financial conversation. So there's the finances, the balance sheet, the limited resources, and the goal that we have to kind of get through. But if we don't talk about some of these other things around that topic, it can lead to a difficult conversation, I guess, because we don't know the other person across the table as well as we should, right? And we should try to pursue that information a little bit more diligently, I guess.
I think so. And I also think advisors like you can take the time, and I know you do, but take the time and just when setting up a spending plan, I prefer that other than the word budget, just because it's more positive. But when you're setting up a spending plan, or if this comes up around the holidays, to just engage the partners in a conversation about, well, what was it like for you? And how did you make this decision? And do you want to do anything differently? And I think just having someone facilitate that can also be helpful when it feels really charged, because we all know it can feel very charged with the person that you love the most. And when someone intervenes in a neutral way, it can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Not to completely switch gears, because we're going to talk about money silence and taboo, but I do want to touch on your expertise in helping women talk about money, specifically professional women, professional breadwinners. What are some of the challenges that females in the workplace are up against when we come to this topic of money, compensation, negotiation, whatever is most interesting to you? I think it's all useful to maybe explore if you want to get into that a little bit. Yeah.
So, I think where I really focus these days is really on the psychology of negotiation and fee setting, and also how to be more confident in that. I work with a lot of female business owners who are service professionals. So that's a coach, a consultant, an advisor, lawyer, someone who's in that realm, CPA. And what I find, and I think men struggle too, and I do work with men, it just tends to be less often. What I find is that often people are really good at whatever they do, so whatever their expertise is, but they haven't really thought through what their value is in the market and how to communicate that value. And when you're a service professional, and you can probably relate to this, you are the product. So it becomes a little confusing. It's not like you're selling a widget or an iPhone, or, you're selling yourself. And so I think for a lot of women, because there are a lot of mixed messages around, we're supposed to be caring and kind and relationship oriented and helping. And there is often, and I've experienced this now, there is often this message of, well, let's just barter, or help us out. Your women's organization, help us out, reduce your fee. There's a lot of that. And I think that the work that I do is help people step back and go, so what is your psychology around negotiation? What did you learn growing up? What have your experiences been? And where do you want to be? And so it's not like I tell them where they want to be. It's like they kind of know that maybe they need to up their fees because they've been charging the same thing for 15 years. And there is this thing called inflation. And also you become, more and more expert at your profession over time. And that's the value. Or it could be someone comes in very specifically. I can think of one woman in particular, worked in the financial services industry, not as an advisor, but had been passed over several times. And there is a myth out there that a lot of women hold that if I just am really good at my job, if I just put my head down, that I will get recognized. And she was one of these women. And we looked at her negotiation mindset and all her fears around speaking up and if she'd lose her job. And she ended up over the long term being able to negotiate a better title and increase her salary by $50,000. But it took her building up the confidence and the strategies and having someone cheer her on to do it.
Let's talk about that a little further because I've witnessed that personally. So any promotion that my wife has ever gotten, she got some great advice from some mentors early on in her career to put together essentially her proposal to ask for promotions and raises. But she's had to ask for everything she's ever gotten. So I've witnessed this firsthand. What's going on that? Is it just why are women being overlooked? Why aren't they asking for it? Help us unpack that a little bit more.
Sure. I think it's complicated. I think it depends on the industry. Right. There is a lot of unconscious bias. And by the way, that's everybody. That isn't just men have unconscious bias. There's a lot of assumptions we make about him versus her in the workplace, especially if somebody is a mother. They often have a bias of, oh, are they really going to stay around that long? You know, do we really invest in her? Because if she has a second kid, she might be out. And I also think that if you look at how long women have been in the workforce, like really full time, we're only talking like the 70s. So
which is bananas, right?
What is that, 50 years?
Like yesterday.
Yeah. And so, you know, if somebody younger is listening, they're like, oh, that was so long ago. It was not that long ago. Yeah. And we haven't had a lot of practice. So I think part of it is, in the beginning, women were just happy to be in the workforce. And then it became, well, wait a second, we're not getting equal pay. And then, you know, there are systematic issues that need to change. But on an individual level, it's learning the skills and the strategies. And as a woman, it is a different sell. There is research that women often get promoted or hired not on their potential like men, but on what they've done in the past.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's performance, past performance. And the other thing is, I think there is a way in which if you negotiate like some men have negotiated in the past, like a really hardball negotiation, as a woman in general, it's going to backfire. So one of the things your wife really did right was to show up and have thought about it up front and to come up with a way to communicate value, a way to make the business case. And there's actually newer research out there that says if women come and actually propose a range first, they're likely to get more than if they just sit there and someone gives them an increase or says the salary. So that pre-work, I think, is really, really important in taking care of ourselves. Yeah.
So do you essentially coach around that to be prepared to showcase where you've added value specifically? Where in the past have you delivered for this firm or for this organization and making that specific business case? So building that proposal, if you will, is what you coach around as well.
Right. So somebody comes in, the first thing we do is we look at kind of what are their thoughts and beliefs about money and negotiation. Then we look at what's your value? How do you know your value? How do you price yourself? You know, whether you work for a company or yourself. And then how do you communicate that value? Because it's one thing to know it. It's another to put it in terms that are going to resonate with whoever is paying you. And then how do you go about and do that ask? And part of the ask is gearing yourself up before the ask. So, you know, if that is getting, you know, for me, anytime I'm not confident, I think about skiing down the hardest trail I've ever skied. And often it's the one in Vermont called Paradise. It's a really, really hard tree trail. And I just visualize that and I feel really powerful. And then I go in and I deliver. So some of it's that psychological piece. And then what do you do after the ask? The other thing is sometimes people say no. It's just the way it is. And 80% of the time they should be saying yes, but 20% of the time they should be saying no. Otherwise you're undercharging. So it's then what do you do with the no and how do you be resilient? So I do that individually with people. I also do that in master classes and I have an ongoing ongoing mentor coaching group where women come once a month and just make sure they're staying on track, not just with negotiation, but with also building their businesses.
Yeah. And what, just to jump back real quick, because I'm interested in the beginning part of that process where you're talking about mindset and thoughts or feelings about negotiation. What are some of the hesitations or, does that cause stress or anxiety? What's going on when people are perhaps a little reluctant to negotiate? Is that, again, just their past demographics, where they come from, their money story in general? Or do you see anything specific there?
Part of it's about the money story, but a lot of the clients that come to me say things like, if I negotiate, I'm going to lose the client. So that scarcity mentality. I had another woman I worked with recently, and I'm smiling because she was great to work with, but she's like, but when I know a client, I always give them a discount. I'm like, they've already bought your value. They're not asking for a discount, but somehow that was a connection. And, I've done that. So it's not, that out of reason, but it's helping her wait for them to ask for, the reduction. And for some people, it's just, they've had a bad experience. One thing that comes to mind, a woman I worked with a long time ago, her bad experience happened in high school. She was a babysitter. She asked for a raise. She was like 14. And she never got hired from this family again once she asked for a raise. Now, until we started coaching together, she didn't even remember that, but she was like petrified to ask for a raise. Just being aware that she had this negative event and how it impacted her helped her go in and have a different event.
It's amazing how long those things will stick with us in so many different ways, shapes or forms, right? But again, it gets back to similarly to doing that pre-work as a couple or in a negotiation, understanding where you come from and maybe what some of your hesitation is can help you unpack that a little bit and move through it. Right.
The other thing, the flip side I want to let people know is when you do that work, you also uncover your strengths. It's not just like, oh, where am I messed up? It's like, where are you good at talking about money, or where are you good at negotiating? And what are the thoughts that support that? And what are the ones that get in the way? We're all mixed bags. Nobody's got all of this down. That's what makes money and managing money and talking about money psychology so interesting, is that it's very complicated. But we have to let go of the idea that somehow, oh, Jim, you have it all figured out, or, oh, that person over there has it all figured. That is, even when you're in the profession, right? You don't have it all figured out all the time. You just kind of know where to find the answer.
Yeah. Again, being a financial professional made it worse in my case, talking about money as a starting point, so if you could believe that, it didn't make it better. It made it quite worse.
Well, it's like the therapist who should never have problems. Like I should never be sad because somehow I should be able to pull myself up all the time. So that isn't true, but I get that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, what I'm keying on is understanding yourself leads to potentially a better conversation, regardless of, whether it's a couple and sitting down and trying to develop a financial plan or talk about a budget, or you're a woman entering into a negotiation. And, really understanding yourself and your money mindsets and where you come from can be really powerful or empowering, to use your term, going into those situations. Are there any other, key takeaways or highlights you want to kind of touch on? What else should we be thinking about if we're having a tough time talking about money? Are there other circumstances that you think of or come across regularly in your practice?
Well, this is a whole other topic, but if people are having trouble talking about retirement, anytime there's a transition or a change, that can be complicated. I think what's most important to remember is that there are a lot of resources out there. So you can do online courses, you can read books, you can listen to podcasts. You also can hire coaches. You can work with financial advisors and interview people like yourself and say, is the psychology of money something that you cover in your process? And so you can search out different avenues. The other thing is our relationship with money is big. It starts the first day we're born. It goes through even past when we're gone because of legacy and inheritance. And so you don't have to do it all at once. What I say to somebody who's listening in terms of talking about money, or maybe wanting to get more educated about, negotiations or another area of finance, pick one small area and just chip away at it. And there's no right place to start. There's just where you're motivated to start. And as a couple, if you are having trouble talking about money, it may be just expressing to the other person, I want to do a better job at this. And, how can we think about maybe talking about our successes before we talk about what's wrong? Or maybe we need to do wins. It's really about just starting small. My background's in behavioral change therapy. So it's starting small and moving forward and having a series of little successes. And there are people out there that can help you if you need support. Trust me, I've had my fair share of coaching and therapy and all sorts, speech training, you name it. There's nothing wrong with getting a little support to get you to the next level.
It's such a great piece of advice. And I think if you think about your life, right, money is going to play an important role of it the entire time for most of us. And so there are these recurring themes, and talking about it, being comfortable talking about it comes up throughout, whether you're, again, in a couple trying to develop a financial plan and just come to the table together, a woman negotiating big transitions like retirement, or how do we send our kids to school? The theme of coming to the table and having a good conversation about not just the money, but how we're feeling and how we can communicate better together. It's not going to go away, right? So if you're having trouble with it and you're listening to this, I think that's a great piece of advice to take away. Why don't you just let the other person know that you're uncomfortable? You maybe explore why and just get that out there as step one. And then maybe, set up a time to talk a little bit further next week. Just get the ball rolling.
And the conversations can be 5-10 minutes. It is not about covering everything in 3 hours. And then I always encourage people to pair that conversation, whether you're doing this work individually or as a member of a couple or family, pair it with something you really enjoy. So it may be, for me, I love to be outside in nature. So it may be taking a walk after you have a money conversation for 5 minutes. Just make sure that you're pairing it with something positive, because we have to stop the self-fulfilling prophecy of, money conversations are hard, as opposed to money conversations are like other types of conversations, and kind of neutralizing it a little bit, or at least attaching it to something a little bit more positive than fighting.
I think that's another great idea, because I find the conversation, because it can be challenging. It's a big, powerful part of our lives that it can be emotionally exhausting sometimes as well, right? It's just mentally demanding. And 3 hours seems like way too much time to sit down. Yeah, you just can't handle it, right? Physically, mentally, emotionally, it's just too much. So shortening it up and pairing it with something a little bit more enjoyable, a little reward.
Can be anything. There's no right thing to do afterwards, but just something you really enjoy that isn't about money.
Yeah, right. It's great. You mentioned resources. Before I let you go, I'd be curious, is there any podcasts that you listen to, books you've read? We'll obviously highlight your list of work as well. But is there anything in particular you want to share with people that they might want to check out on the topic, yours or otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a colleague, Manisha Tokor, who's coming out with a book I believe it's called Never Enough. I'll get you the link. But it's about us trying to there's never enough money. There's never enough time. There's never enough. And her background is in finance and psychology and managing money. And so it's a really interesting read. It's coming out shortly. I highly recommend, if you've leaned towards workaholism at all or feel like you're never filled up, that would be a really good read. Certainly totally off topic. If you like a reward,
it's all good. Let's go off topic.
I'm obsessed with Smartless, the podcast with, you know who it is, right? So the Smartless podcast. And I just think it's a great way at the end of a day or the beginning of a day to get a little levity into your life and laugh a little bit. And, the book that helped me the most in the beginning of my journey, it's older. I think it's still in print. It's called The Financial Wisdom of Ebenezer Scrooge. And it's about money mindsets. And it's a very simple read, but really teaches you a little bit about money psychology in a very interesting, parable kind of way. And it's worth checking out because it certainly changed my life and ultimately my career trajectory. So I'm very thankful to Rick Kaler and the Clonces for publishing that book.
It's a great recommendation. last question before I let you go. This is a show about financial well-being, but well-being in general. Besides personal finance and psychology of money and having better conversations yourself around these things, are there any other things that you do that help you reset, help you feel better, help you feel like you're improving your well-being in general?
There is so much that I do that I'm going to just rattle it off. So I live in central Vermont. We are very outdoor oriented. So yesterday, my husband and I, but I went by myself, mountain biking. Mountain biking can really help reset me big time. I do kayaking.
Tough to think about anything else when
because you'll be thrown off, right? So mountain biking is what I do in the summer. That is, you have to be really mindful. And in the winter, I ski. And I ski pretty hard. Same thing, have to be mindful. Those are my two big things. I also do Pilates, kayaking, paddleboarding. You name it. I like to be outside and moving.
Outside, being active. Cool.
Because otherwise I'm writing and inside sitting. So it's a nice juxtaposition and a way to connect with friends that is fun.
And balance. That's great. It's awesome. Also, last question. Any websites, social media accounts, where do people check your workout and yourself if they were interested in learning or connecting with you?
The easiest place is my website, breakingmoneysilence.com. I have a podcast by the same name. You can ask Siri, hey, play Breaking Money Silence podcast. That's kind of a fun giggle for me when I do that. And, my books and everything is all there as well as my social media. I'm primarily on LinkedIn these days, so check me out there as well. Thank you so much, Jim. This has been super fun.
It's been really enlightening. I think you bring so much to the table with your expertise and your background, the clients you've worked with. It's such an important topic to try to help people have good conversations, better conversations, feel more comfortable talking about money. So I really appreciate the time. And we will have to have you back to talk about behavior change and your background there sometime, because that's another really interesting, fully loaded topic. So someday I'll twist your arm again to coming back if you don't mind.
That sounds fine. I've enjoyed Breaking Money Silence with you today and welcome doing it again in the future.
All right, great. If you like what you heard, please like and share the podcast. You can go over to modernfinancialwellness.com if you haven't checked it out already. Check out this episode and much more. Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, thank you again, and we'll look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Take care.
Thanks for listening, everybody.